Law O3. Hide your intentions. Statement of the law. Keep people in the dark in a state of precarious equilibrium by never revealing the motive behind your actions. Unaware of what you intend to do, they will be unable to protect themselves. Lead them astray, create confusion, and by the time they realize your intentions, it will be too late. Part 1. Use decoys and distractions to throw people off the scent. If, while you are deceiving, people somehow develop even the slightest suspicion, all is lost. Don't give them the slightest chance to sense what you were getting at. Confuse their tracks, plant signs that lead them down the wrong path. Don't neglect false sincerity, make ambiguous statements, and set misleading bait. Those who cannot distinguish truth from falsehood will be unable to discern your true purpose. Breaking the law. For several months, Ninon de Lenclos, a notorious 17th century French courtesan, patiently listened to the Marquis de Sévigné-Tallez of his efforts to win the beautiful but unattainable young countess. Ninon, then 62 years old, was more experienced in matters of love than anyone else. Unlike the 22-year-old Marquise, attractive and energetic but inexperienced in romance, at first Ninon was amused by the Marquise's tales of his mistakes, but eventually they grew tiresome, intolerant of stupidity and clumsiness in anything. Least of all in winning a woman, she decided to take the youth under her wing. Above all, he needed to understand that war was beginning, and the lovely countess was nothing less than a fortress. To break her resistance, military cunning was necessary. Every step had to be planned and executed with the utmost attention to detail and nuance. Discussing the outbreak of hostilities with the Marquis, Ninon instructed him to maintain an air of indifference when approaching the Countess. Next time, she instructed, when alone with the Countess, the Marquis should assure her that he was her friend and not a potential lover. This was necessary to lull her vigilance. The Marquise's interest would no longer seem self-evident to the Countess, perhaps. She would think he was only interested in her friendship. Nina developed the next stages of her plan. Having confused the Countess, she needed to make her jealous. The next time, at a grand celebration in Paris, the Marquise was to appear with a beautiful young companion. She had equally charming friends. So now the Countess would constantly see the Marquise surrounded by the most brilliant Parisian beauties. The Countess would not simply be inflamed with jealousy. She would see the Marquis in a different light, as a man desirable to someone. Ninon had to work hard to make the Marquise understand this, but she patiently repeated that a woman interested in a man wants to see that he is interested in other women as well. This not only immediately increases his value, but also makes the process of winning him over much more interesting and satisfying. Now, when the Countess was bound to become jealous and languishing in uncertainty, it was time for a diversionary tactic. Following Ninon's instructions, the Marquise began skipping balls and gatherings where the Countess expected to meet him, but instead unexpectedly appearing in salons he had never attended before, but which the Countess frequented, let her be unable to anticipate his actions. All this would plunge her into a state of mental turmoil, harbinger of capitulation. At first, everything went according to plan and took several weeks. Ninon followed the Marquise's progress. Her spies reported that the Countess was laughing ever louder at his witticisms and listening ever more attentively to his stories. She was informed that the Countess had suddenly begun asking about the Marquise. Friends told her that the Countess sought him out at balls, following him closely. Ninon was certain that the young woman was under his spell. Now it was a matter of weeks, perhaps a month or two, but everything was going according to plan, and the fortress was about to fall. A few days later, the Marquise visited the Countess. They were alone. Suddenly, he changed completely, this time obeying his own impulse. Forgetting Ninon's admonitions, he grabbed the Countess's hand and confessed his love. The woman was embarrassed. He had expected a different reaction. She became coldly polite. Throughout the evening, she avoided meeting his eyes and soon excused herself, wishing him good night. When he came to visit her, he was told she was not home. When she finally agreed to meet again, they both felt awkward and couldn't find the right tone. The spell had worn off. Interpretation. Ninon de Lenclos knew all about the art of love. The greatest writers, thinkers, and politicians of the time were among her lovers, to name just a few. La Rochefoucauld, Molière, Richelieu. As she grew older and her fame as Ninon grew up, the best families in France sent their sons to her to be taught the art of love. Ninon knew that despite the differences between men and women, their reactions to seduction attempts are usually the same deep down. They sense they are being tempted, but they give in because they enjoy being led. It's a pleasure to let go of the reins, to relax, to allow another person to lead you to unknown lands. Everything in the art of seduction, however, rests on omissions. You can't reveal your intentions or put them bluntly into words. Instead, you must throw your victims off the scent. To make them obediently follow you, you need to confuse and disorient them. You need to send false signals, pretending to be interested in another man or woman, a decoy, hiding your interest in the victim, feigning indifference, and so on. This behavior not only confuses but also arouses interest in you. Imagine the same story from the young countess's perspective. After a few moves by the Marquis, she sensed he was playing a game, but this game fascinated her. She didn't know where he was leading her, but she was ready for anything. His actions intrigued her. His every step made her wonder what would follow. She even enjoyed her jealousy and embarrassment, because sometimes any feeling is more precious to us than the boredom of security. The Countess, of course, could guess the Marquis's hidden intentions. They are common to most men. But she wanted to wait and observe, and perhaps if he managed to prolong this wait long enough, she would no longer care so much about her partner's true nature. However, from the moment the Marquis chose to utter those fateful words, "I love you," everything changed. There was no longer any play, only a straightforward display of passion. His intentions were laid bare. He truly wanted to seduce her. All his actions, hitherto intriguing, even enchanting, now appeared in a different light, ugly and cynical. The Countess felt dismayed, devastated. The door slammed shut, never to be opened again. Try not to be known as a deceiver, though it is impossible to live today without being one. Your greatest cunning should be to conceal your cunning. Balthasar Gracian. Abide by the law. In 1850, young Otto von Bismarck, a 35-year-old member of the Prussian parliament, was at the turning point of his career. The agenda was the unification of several states, including Prussia, into which Germany was fragmented, and a war against Austria, a powerful southern neighbor whose interest in a weak Germany threatened to invade if unification occurred. Duke Wilhelm, the heir to the Prussian throne, spoke in favor of war, and Parliament was unanimous in preparing for the mobilization of the army. Only King Friedrich Wilhelm IV and his ministers opposed it, preferring not to exacerbate relations with a strong Austria. Throughout his career, Bismarck loyally, even passionately, supported the idea of a strong and powerful Prussia. He dreamed of German unification, of war with Austria, of the defeat of the country that had kept Germany divided for so long. A former soldier, he envisioned the military campaign as a victorious march to glory. This, after all, was the same man who said many years later, the great questions of the time will be decided not by speeches and resolutions, but by iron and blood. A passionate patriot and a devotee of military glory, Bismarck nevertheless delivered a speech in Parliament at the height of the war fever. The speech struck a chord. "Woe to the statesmen," he said, "who begin a war without a reason that will remain important even after the war's over. After the war, you will look at many problems differently. Will you then have the courage to look into the eyes of a peasant mourning the ashes, a cripple, a father who has lost his children?" Bismarck not only continued to paint the horrors of war, but, most oddly, he praised Austria and defended its actions. This went against everything he had previously stood for. The consequences were immediate. Bismarck was against war. What could that mean? The other deputies were confused, and many changed their minds during the vote. As a result, the king and his ministers won, and war was averted. A few weeks after Bismarck's infamous speech, the king, grateful for his support for peace, appointed him minister. A few years later, Bismarck became Prime Minister of Prussia. In this role, he finally led his country and his peace-loving king into war with Austria, destroying the mighty empire and establishing a strong German state under Prussian dominance. Interpretation. Preparing for his 1850 intervention, Bismarck calculated the situation meticulously. First, he understood that although the Prussian military was militaristic, Prussia was militarily far inferior to other European countries. Austria had every chance of victory to fight, and that would have been catastrophic. Secondly, if the war had been lost, Bismarck's career as a politician, had he spoken out in favor of war, would have been irrevocably ruined. The king and his conservative ministers wanted peace. Bismarck wanted power. To achieve this, he misled everyone by voicing support for what he had previously rejected, uttering words he would have ridiculed had they come from anyone else. The entire country was fooled. Thanks to Bismarck's speech, the king made him a minister, a position from which he quickly rose to the post of prime minister, gaining power, strengthening Prussia's military potential, and finally achieving what he had set out to achieve. Austria was defeated, and Germany united with Prussia as its leader. Bismarck was, without a doubt, the most astute statesman of all time, a master of strategy and subterfuge. No one suspected his true intentions in this case. Had he announced his real intentions, explaining that it was better to wait now and start the war later, he would not have won the vote, since Prussia was eager for war immediately, and was deluded in believing itself capable of defeating Austria. Had he begun to flirt with the king, trying to obtain a ministerial portfolio from him in exchange for support for a peaceful policy, he would have been unsuccessful here too. The king, having guessed his ambitions, would have doubted his sincerity. By acting completely insincerely and sending false signals, he misled everyone, veiled his true motives, and achieved everything he wanted. Thus, the ability to conceal one's intentions leads to power. Keys to power. Most people are like open books. They say what they feel, blurt out their opinions at every opportunity, and constantly communicate their plans and intentions. They do this for many reasons. First, it's human nature to always talk about one's feelings and plans for the future. It takes an effort to restrain one's tongue and control one's words. Second, many believe that honesty and openness win hearts and demonstrate their good nature. This is a great misconception. Honesty is, at its core, a blunt instrument that crushes more than it cuts. Honesty is easy to offend. It's far more prudent to tailor your words, telling people what they want to hear, rather than the harsh, ugly truth about how you feel or think. Blind openness makes you so predictable, so understandable that you're almost impossible to respect or fear, and power defies a man who can't evoke such feelings. If you're learning to be powerful, quickly set aside your honesty and begin practicing. The art of concealing your intentions. Master it and you'll always be on top. The ability to conceal your intentions can be explained by a simple property of human nature. Our first instinct is to always trust appearances. We can't live doubting the reality of what we see and hear, constantly thinking that there's something else hidden behind what we see would exhaust and intimidate us. This is what makes it relatively easy to conceal our thoughts and intentions from each other. Simply display the object you want to pass off as desirable, the goal you're supposedly pursuing, and everyone will believe it's real. If their eyes are focused on the bait, they'll miss what you're really striving for. When seducing, present conflicting signals such as desire and indifference, and you'll not only confuse everyone, but also arouse in people a desire to follow you. A diversionary tactic is often effective, in which you pretend to support an idea or position that is actually contrary to your own feelings. Bismarck used this tactic to great effect in 1850. Most will believe you have genuinely changed, as it is unusual to play with views and values so easily. The same applies to any dummy object. Pretend to greatly desire something you are not really interested in, and your enemies will follow the wrong trail, making continuous mistakes in their calculations. During the War of the Spanish Succession in 1711, the Duke of Marlborough, commander-in-chief of the English army, wanted to destroy a key French fort protecting the main arteries of France. At the same time, it was clear to him that if the fort were destroyed, his intentions to seize this important road would become clear to the French. Therefore, he merely occupied the fort and stationed some of his troops there, creating the appearance of needing the fort for some purpose. The French troops attacked the fort, and the Duke allowed them to recapture it. Having barely regained possession of the fort, the French themselves destroyed it, lest it fall into the hands of the Duke, who, in their opinion, needed it for some purpose. The fort was destroyed, the roads were left uncovered, and Marlborough marched unhindered across France. This tactic can also be used in the following way. Conceal your intentions, not by hiding them. This risks appearing secretive and arousing mistrust and suspicion, but by constantly talking about your plans and aspirations, but not the true ones. You'll kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You'll appear welcoming, open, and trustworthy. You'll disguise your intentions, and you'll send your competitors on a time-consuming chase after the impossible. Another powerful tool for misleading people is false sincerity. People easily mistake sincerity for honesty. Remember, their first instinct is to trust appearances. And since they value honesty and want to believe in the honesty of others, they're unlikely to doubt you or see right through you. Making it clear you believe what you're saying gives your words enormous weight. This is how Iago deceived and ruined Othello. Iago saw the depth of his feelings, his genuine concern about Desdemona's supposed infidelity. How could Othello not believe him? This is how the brilliant con artist Vale, nicknamed the Yellow Kid, deceived the simpletons. He seemed so convinced of the authenticity of the counterfeit object he offered his clients. Fake stocks, a horse bought at a racetrack, that it was difficult to doubt its veracity. It's important, of course, not to go too far. Sincerity is a tricky thing. Overdoing it with excessive pathos can arouse suspicion. Remember to keep a sense of proportion. Strive to be convincing and truthful. Otherwise, your trick will look like the deception it is. To make false sincerity an effective weapon in concealing true intentions. Foster a belief in honesty and openness as important social values. Make public statements. Emphasize your position on the issue by occasionally uttering a heartfelt thought, of course, one that's meaningless or irrelevant. Napoleon's minister Talleyrand masterfully gained people's trust by confiding some secret. This feigned trusted decoy would then allow him to gain genuine trust from the other person. Remember, the best deceivers do everything possible to disguise their fraudulent nature. They learn to appear honest to cover up their dishonest actions. Honesty is just one tool in their vast arsenal. Part 2. Use a smokescreen to hide your intentions. Cunning is always the best strategy, but the best cunning requires a smokescreen to distract people from your true goals. A winning appearance like the poker face of a poker player often serves as a good screen, concealing your intentions behind something comfortable and familiar. If you lead a simpleton down a familiar path, he won't even notice he's been lured into a trap. Terrence stood law when, in 1910, Mr. Sam Giselle of Chicago sold his warehouse business for approximately $1 million. He settled into semi-retirement managing his real estate, but deep down he longed for the old days when he'd been busy making serious deals. One day, a young man named Joseph Vale came to his office wanting to buy an apartment Giselle had listed. Giselle explained that the apartment was worth $8,000, but he only wanted a $2,000 deposit. Vale said he would give him an answer the next day. The next morning, he came back with a counteroffer. He would pay the full $8,000 in cash if Giselle could wait a few days until Vale was ready to make the deal. Although Giselle had largely retired, he was still a businessman and was puzzled how Vale could come up with such a sum of cash, equivalent to $150,000 today in such a short time. Vale seemed reluctant to answer and quickly changed the subject, but Giselle persisted. Finally, after extracting a promise to remain confidential, Vale told the following story. Vale's uncle served as secretary to a group of multimillionaire financiers. 10 years earlier, the wealthy gentleman had purchased an estate and hunting lodge in Michigan at a low price. After several years of neglect, they decided to sell it, and Vale's uncle was tasked with the task. For a number of compelling reasons, Vale's uncle had harbored a grudge and resentment against the millionaires for years. Now he had a chance to make amends. He decided to sell the property for $35,000 to a frontman. Vale would have to find such a person. The financiers were too wealthy to be upset by the low price. The front buyer could then resell the estate for its true value, around $155,000. Vale and a third party would split the difference. Everything was legal, and there was a reason for doing so. His uncle was simply seeking justice for himself. Giselle had heard enough. He wanted to become a straw buyer. Vale was unenthusiastic about the offer, but Giselle persisted. The idea of making a good profit and getting a little titillation was a good one. The whole thing captivated him instantly. Vale explained that Giselle would have to put up $35,000 in cash to complete the deal. GSO, a millionaire, replied that it was as easy as snapping his fingers. Vale finally relented, agreeing to arrange a meeting between GSO, his uncle, and the financiers in Galesburg, Illinois. On the train to Galesburg, Giselle met with his uncle, who impressed him favorably, and they discussed the details of the deal. Vale also brought his companion George Gross, a burly man with a potbelly. He was a boxing trainer by profession, Vale explained to Giselle, and Gross was one of his most promising fighters. He decided to take Gross with him to keep him in shape before the big match. For a promising athlete, Gross looked a bit odd. Gray hair, beer belly, but Giselle was so focused on the upcoming deal that he ignored the boxer's unathletic appearance. Arriving in Galesburg, Vale and his uncle went to meet with the financiers, leaving Giselle to wait in the hotel room with Gross, who immediately donned his boxing attire. Giselle watched with half an eye as Gross began shadowboxing. Lost in thought, he didn't notice how the boxer wore out after a few minutes of practice, though his boxing style was quite respectable. An hour later, Vale, his uncle, and the financiers arrived, an impressive group of serious men in respectable, expensive suits. The meeting was a success. The financiers agreed to sell the property to Giselle, who had already wired $35,000 to a local bank. Having settled this minor matter, the financiers sat back in their chairs and discussed big business, constantly mentioning J.P. Morgan as if they were on first-name terms. Finally, one of them noticed a boxer in the corner of the room. Wall explained why he was there. The financier noticed that he had a boxer in his entourage and named him. Wall laughed and declared that Gross would easily beat him. The conversation devolved into an argument. Passions flared, and Wall proposed a bet. The financiers accepted it enthusiastically and hurried off to prepare their athlete for the fight. As soon as they were out the door, Uncle pounced on Vale, not even bothering to mention Giselle's presence. They didn't have enough money to bet, and as soon as the financiers found out, he, Uncle, would be fired. Vale apologized for getting him into trouble. However, he had a plan. He knew the other boxer well and figured that he would give in for a small sum. But where would they get the money to make the bet? Uncle persisted. Without it, they were practically dead. And then Giselle intervened. Not wanting to ruin his deal over an annoying trifle, he offered his own $35,000 as part of the bet. Even having lost it now, he wouldn't be left out in the cold, having gotten his own back after the resale of the estate. The uncle and nephew couldn't thank him enough. Their own $15,000 and Giselle's $35,000 were just enough to place the bet. That evening, as Giselle watched the two boxers spar in the same room, his thoughts were consumed by the considerable profit to be made from the double deal, the boxing match and the sale of the estate. Fight took place the next day in the gym. Vale deposited the cash, which was locked in a safe for safety. Everything proceeded according to the plan drawn up in the hotel room. The financiers frowned at their athlete's poor performance, and Giselle was already calculating his share of the winnings. Suddenly, the financier's boxer landed a sharp punch to Gross's face, and he fell. When he rose, everyone saw a trickle of blood flowing from his mouth. He coughed and tried to get up, but lay frozen on the floor. One of the financiers, a former doctor, felt his pulse. Gross was dead. The millionaires panicked. They had to leave before the police showed up. Those present could be charged with murder. Terrorized, Giesel rushed out of the room and hurried to Chicago, leaving behind $35,000, which he was glad to forget, considering it a small price to pay for not being implicated in the murder case. He never tried to meet Vale or the other participants in the deal again. After Giesel's escape, Gross rose from the floor unassisted. A trickle of blood trickled from his mouth, coming from a pouch of chicken blood diluted with warm water hidden in his cheek. The entire scam was masterminded by Vale, better known in the U.S. as Yellow Kid, one of the most talented con artists of all time. Vale divided $35,000 between financiers and boxers, also con artists. Pleasant reward for just a few days' work. Jehu, king of Israel, pretends to offer a sacrifice to the idol of Baal. Then Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, Ahab has served Baal a little. Jehu will serve him more. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his ministers, and all his priests, that no one be absent. For I will offer a great sacrifice to Baal, and whoever does not show up will not stay. Jehu did this with the cunning intention of destroying the worshippers of Baal. Then Jehu said, Proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed an assembly. Then Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came. There was not a man left who did not come. So they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. Then Jehu entered into the house of Baal and said to the worshippers of Baal, Search and see if there be any of the servants of the Lord with you, for none but the worshippers of Baal should be here. So they began to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu stationed 80 men outside the house and said, Whoever's life escapes among the people I have committed to your hand shall be for the life of him who escapes. And when the burnt offering was made, Jehu said to the runners and the captains, Go, strike them, that not one escape. So they struck them with the edge of the sword. The runners and the captains threw them down and went to the city where Baal's house was. They took out the images of Baal's house and burned them. They broke the image of Baal and threw down the house of Baal and made it a cesspool to this day. So Jehu destroyed Baal from the land of Israel. Old Testament, 4th book, Kings 10:18-28. Interpretation. Vale had identified Giesel as the ideal victim long before he planned the scam. He decided that murder in the ring was the perfect way to force Giesel to part with his money and never think about it again. But he also realized he had no chance of interesting Giesel in a boxing match. So he decided to conceal his intentions for now and concocted a story about selling a hunting lodge, a smokescreen. On the train and in the hotel room, Giesel's thoughts were completely preoccupied with the upcoming deal, the easy money, and the opportunity to socialize with financial heavyweights over a drink. He ignored Gross's poor physical condition and his advanced age. Such is the distracting power of a smokescreen. Giesel's attention was preoccupied with the deal, so although he readily latched onto the story of the boxing match, his doubts only began to surface when it was too late to notice the telling details that indicated Gross would certainly fail. Moreover, the outcome of the match was decided by bribery, not the boxer's physical condition. And by the end, Giesel was so smitten with the illusion of the boxer's death that he completely forgot about his money. If there's one lesson to be learned from the Yellow Kid, it's that a familiar, unsuspicious setting serves as an excellent smokescreen. Approach your goal through a situation that would otherwise appear quite ordinary, a business agreement, a deal, a financial intrigue. The victim's attention will be distracted and suspicion will not arise. Then you can gently introduce him to the second part, the inclined plane, where he will helplessly slide straight into the trap you've set. Adherence to the lock, too. In the mid-1920s, influential Ethiopian warlords realized that a young aristocrat named Haile Selassie, also known as the Negus, the shortened title of the Emperor of Ethiopia until the abolition of the monarchy in 1975, Rastafari was outcompeting them, and that the moment was approaching when he could proclaim himself their leader, uniting the country for the first time in decades. Most of his rivals could not understand how this graceful, quiet man with his inexpressive manner had managed to subjugate everyone. And yet, in 1927, Selassie began summoning his military commanders one by one to Addis Ababa to recognize him as head of state and reaffirm their loyalty. Some were distraught, others wavered, and only one, Dejazma Balka of Sadamo, dared to openly disobey. Balka was a fiery man, a true military man, and considered the new leader weak and unworthy. He did not appear in the capital. Finally, Selassie, in his characteristic polite but firm manner, ordered Balka to appear. The commander decided to obey, but to try to upset the pretender to the Ethiopian throne. He planned to arrive in Addis Ababa with an army of 10,000 men, enough to ensure his own safety, and perhaps even start a civil war. He stationed his warriors in a valley 3 miles from the capital and waited as if he were a king. Selassie was supposed to pay him a visit. Selassie did indeed send Balka an invitation to the palace for a reception held in his honor. But Balka was no fool and knew history. He knew that previous Ethiopian leaders and kings had often staged ambush receptions. Selassie could have had him captured and killed at the palace. To make it clear to him that the situation was clear, Balka agreed to attend the celebration, but only with a guard 600 of his finest soldiers, armed and ready to defend him and themselves. To Balka's surprise, Selassie very kindly replied that he would be honored to host such distinguished warriors. On the way, Balka told the soldiers not to drink too much and to be on their guard. When they arrived at the palace, Selassie was the very picture of hospitality. Because of the way he treated Balka, one might have thought that what he needed most was his support and approval. But Balka resisted his charm and warned Selassie if he did not return to camp by sunset, his troops would advance on the capital. Selassie seemed deeply hurt by this mistrust. During dinner, when it was time for traditional songs in honor of the Ethiopian chieftains, he ordered that only the chieftain from Sidamo be sung. Balka seemed frightened and depressed by the presence of such a great warrior who also proved incorruptible. Sensing the change, Balka already believed he had gained control of the situation. Towards evening, Balka and his soldiers set out on their return journey to cheers and a rifle salute. Looking over his shoulder at the capital, Balka made plans, imagining how, in a matter of weeks, his own soldiers would march triumphantly through the capital, how Selassie would be captured and imprisoned or executed. However, upon approaching the camp, Balka realized something terrible had happened. Where just that morning, colorful tents had stretched as far as the eye could see, now only smoke from extinguished fires could be seen. What kind of devilish obsession was this? A witness recounted what had happened. During a celebration at the palace, a large force commanded by a comrade of Selassie had crept up on Balka's army along a side road he hadn't noticed. The army, however, had no intention of engaging in battle, knowing that Balka and his bodyguards would rush to their aid upon hearing the noise of battle. Selassie armed his troops with baskets of gold and money. Surrounding Balka's warriors, they began to ransom their weapons. Those who refused were threatened with death. Within hours, Balka's entire army was disarmed, and the soldiers fled in all directions. Realizing the danger he was in, Balka decided to retreat south with his 600 soldiers to regroup. But the same army that had disarmed his army stood in his way. Another option was to march on the capital, but Selassie was waiting there with a large army ready to defend himself. Like a chess player, Selassie calculated Balka's every move and was the first to checkmate him. For the first time in his life, Balka was surrounded. He ended his days in a monastery, repenting of the sins of pride and overconfidence. Interpretation. During Selassie's long reign, no one could fully understand him. Ethiopians admire strength, even ferocity in leaders. But Selassie, with his gentle, peace-loving demeanor, remained on the throne longer than any of them, never losing his temper or allowing outbursts of anger. He lured his victims with sweet smiles, lulled them with his charm, and pleased them before attacking. In Balka's case, Selassie played on the leader's belligerence and his suspicions that the reception would be a trap. And indeed, there was a trap, but not where one might have expected it. Selassie's assuagement of Balka's fears by allowing him to bring a guard into the palace, by honoring him, by making him feel that his position was strong, was a thick veil of smoke that obscured his true actions 3 miles from the capital. Remember, the suspicious and belligerent are often the easiest to deceive. Gain their trust in one area and you've created a smokescreen that will blind them in another, allowing you to sneak up and deliver a crushing blow. Make a noble or friendly gesture, or let your opponents see their own superiority. These are excellent means of sabotage. A well-placed smokescreen is a powerful weapon. Haile Selassie used it to utterly defeat his enemy without firing a shot. Beware of underestimating Tafari's power. He stalks like a mouse, but his jaws are like a lion's. Last words of Balka of Sidamo before leaving for the monastery. Keys to power. If you think deceivers are flamboyant people who spout lies, tricks, and fabrications at every turn, you are mistaken. The best of them have a trustworthy appearance and do not attract attention. They know that extravagant words and actions will immediately arouse suspicion. Instead, they disguise their schemes as something familiar, banal, and harmless. In the case of Yellow Baby Weil and Sam Giesel, the familiar was business. In the Ethiopian case, it was Selassie's deceptive servility, exactly the kind of behavior Balka expected from a military leader inferior to him. Once you lull your target's attention with what they expected, they lose the ability to spot the deception right behind them. This is explained by a simple truth. People can only focus on one thing at a time. It's too difficult for them to imagine that a nice and harmless person could simultaneously be plotting something. The grayer and more ordinary the smoke of your veil, the easier it is to conceal your intentions. By using the technique of false trails and decoys as discussed in Part 1, you are actively misleading people. The smokescreen helps lull the fool into a trap and trap him into a web. It hypnotizes, and that's precisely why it's the best way to conceal your intentions. The simplest form of smokescreen is facial expression. Hiding behind a friendly, unremarkable exterior, you can plan any evil deed without anyone even guessing. Many powerful historical figures have used this weapon. Franklin D. Roosevelt, for example, is known to have had a completely impenetrable face. Baron James Rothschild used this technique his entire life, hiding his true thoughts behind wide, welcoming smiles or uncertain glances. Stendhal wrote of Talleyrand, "There never was a face more difficult to read." Henry Kissinger brought his opponents to tears at the negotiating table with his monotonous voice, expressionless appearance, an endless list of details, then suddenly stunned them by presenting a list of bold demands. Taken by surprise, they were easily persuaded. One poker textbook explains it this way: when playing his hand, a good player rarely puts on an act. Instead, he adopts a bland demeanor, making him unreadable. This confuses and keeps his opponents on edge, requiring greater concentration. The concept of smokescreen can be applied at different levels, but in all cases, it involves the psychological principles of distraction and misdirection. One of the most effective types of smokescreen is the noble act. People want to believe in the sincerity of noble acts because they feel good about believing it. Rarely do they realize how deceptive these acts can be. Art dealer Joseph Duvin once faced a terrible problem. The millionaire clients who so eagerly paid Duvin for his paintings were running out of wall space, and with inheritance taxes rising, it looked like buying was about to stop. The solution was the Washington, D.C. art gallery Duvin helped found in 1937 by persuading Andrew Mellon to donate his collection to the museum. The National Gallery became the perfect cover for Duvin. In one fell swoop, his clients avoided taxes, freed up wall space for new acquisitions, and reduced the number of paintings on the market, thereby maintaining prices. At the same time, the donors gained a reputation for philanthropy. Another effective form of smokescreen is a pattern, a series of actions that lure the target into believing you will continue in the same direction. The pattern plays on the psychological principle of expectation. Our behavior follows patterns, or perhaps we just like to think so. In 1878, American criminal Baron J. Gould founded a company that began to threaten the monopoly of the Western Union Telegraph Company. The company's directors decided to buy Gould's firm. They had to pay a hefty sum, but they wanted to get rid of this unpleasant rival. A few months later, however, Gould reappeared, complaining that he had been treated unfairly. He created a second company and again began competing with Western Union in its new acquisition. History repeated itself. Western Union bought this company too. Soon it all started a third time, but this time Gould acted differently. He launched a brutal war of conquest and was able to ultimately gain complete control of Western Union. Gould's repeated actions fooled the company's management, who assumed he was after profitable sales. After paying, they relaxed their guard, unaware that their adversary was upping the ante. Patterns in behavior are good because they deceive, making others see you as predictable and expect something completely different from what you actually intended. Another psychological weakness that can be exploited to create a smokescreen is the tendency to mistake appearances for reality. The feeling that if someone acts like you, they really are. This makes mimicry a very effective tactic. It's a simple trick. You blend in with those around you. The better you do this, the less suspicion you'll arouse. During the infamous Cold War, many British government officials were involved in passing classified information to the Soviets. For a long time, they remained undetected because they were one of the guys attending privileged private schools and fitting in perfectly with the respectable society of their alumni. Mimicry is the best cover for a spy. The better you master it, the easier it is to conceal your true intentions. Remember, it takes patience and humility to tone down the bright colors and put on an inconspicuous mask. Don't be upset if you have to wear an inconspicuous mask often. It is precisely this impenetrability that attracts people to us and gives us the appearance of being in a position of power, sailing across the ocean in broad daylight. This means creating a screen that will eventually take on a familiar, habitual appearance. This allows the strategist hiding behind it to act undetected, since only the obvious and familiar is revealed to all eyes. Thomas Cleary, 36 Strategies of Japanese Warfare, 1991. Image: sheepskin. A sheep will not rob. A sheep will not betray. A sheep is incredibly stupid and harmless. With a sheepskin on its back, a fox can easily sneak right into a henhouse. Authoritative opinion. Have you ever heard of a skillful commander who, when preparing to capture a fortress, would inform the enemy of his plan? Conceal your purpose and do not boast of your successes. Do not let anyone know how far your plans extend until something can interfere with them, until the battle is over. Win before war is declared. In a word, imitate soldiers whose intentions are unknown to anyone, except the devastated countries through which they have already passed on their victorious march. Ninon de Lenclos, 1623-1706. Reverse side, neither a thick veil of smoke, nor diversionary maneuvers, nor false sincerity, nor other tricks will help one who has already acquired a firm reputation for deception. And as you grow older and achieve success, it becomes increasingly difficult to disguise your cunning. If everyone knows you're a scam artist, feigning naivety and simplicity will make you look like a complete hypocrite, which will greatly limit your options. In such cases, it's best to honestly and openly admit you're a cheat, or better yet, a repentant cheat. Not only will you be forgiven and loved for your sincerity, but most surprisingly, you'll be able to continue your schemes unhindered. As he grew older, P.T. Barnum, the great 19th century hoaxer, learned to exploit his reputation as a master deceiver. He once organized a buffalo hunt in New Jersey, hiring Indians and bringing in several bison from another state. He advertised the hunt as genuine, and although it all seemed highly unnatural, the audience, instead of being outraged and demanding their money back, simply enjoyed it. They knew to expect deception from Barnum. This was the secret of his success, and for this they loved him. Barnum learned from this and stopped hiding his tricks, even exposing many of his deceptions in his autobiography. As Kierkegaard wrote, the world wants to be deceived. While it is wise to distract attention from your goals by wearing a colorless mask, there are times when a more effective tactic is a bright, expressive gesture or action. The greatest European charlatans and con artists of the 17th and 18th centuries won over the public with wit and charm. Enchanted by the magnificent spectacle, the spectators failed to notice the charlatans' true motives. One of them would enter town in a black carriage drawn by black horses. Clowns, stilt-walking acrobats, and jesters would follow, praising and offering elixirs and herbal potions to the crowd. Spectators would gather for the show. The charlatan's true goal, however, was to sell elixirs and potions, which sold well. Performances and attractions are undoubtedly a wonderful way to conceal your intentions, but they can't be used indefinitely. The audience will tire, become suspicious, and eventually catch you red-handed. Indeed, charlatans had to hurry, moving from one place to another before word of their useless potions got the better of them. But men of power with unassuming appearances, Tollerands, Rothschilds, Kissingers, can successfully use their tricks throughout their lives, remaining in one place. Their tricks never wear out and rarely arouse suspicion. A colorful screen can be used only occasionally, choosing the right moment for it.